Okay, counsel, it's getting kind of icky out there and slippery. So I thought what we would do is after this next witness, I'm going to let the jury go. And I'd like counsel to just stick around for a couple minutes so we can talk about the autopsy pics and maybe confer with Emmanuel on how we arrange that. Okay, Emmanuel? All right. Okay. Is counsel ready? All right. Okay, thank you, Deputy.
If you find that the next witness does not go very long, would you consider an additional witness, or do you just really want one?
Oh, I can't hear you.
If you find that the next witness goes pretty quickly, would you consider the second witness? We do have another one in the file.
Okay, well, how long is this witness going to take?
Depending on cross-examination, less than
A half an hour?
less than.
Okay, and how long is your next witness after that?
Depending on cross-examination, less than a half an hour.
Okay, let's see how it goes. Okay, welcome back, members of the jury. Please be seated. Okay, just to let you know, it has started to snow. I am going to conclude the trial today a little bit earlier. I'm going to see how it goes. We may get through one witness or two witnesses, but I'm definitely going to let you go home early today. All right? Okay, the state may call its next witness.
At this time, the state calls Tony Grunig.
Hello, officer. Please come forward and stand behind the witness chair. Raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this case?
I do.
Please take a seat. And remove your mask, please. State your full name and spell it.
It's Tony Lee Grunig, Tonyleegruenig.
Okay, officer, a couple things to keep in mind when you're testifying. The court reporter, as you remember, is taking down everything that's being said. Yes or no, instead of shaking your head, no or uh-uhs. If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. If an objection is made, stop talking. Don't answer the question unless I tell you to. And only one person can talk at a time, so wait until the attorney finishes his question before you answer.
I understand.
Okay. Counsel?
Could you state your occupation for the record?
A police officer with the City of Brooklyn Center,
How long have you been a police officer for Brooklyn Center?
19 years.
Starting in 2002?
Yes, sir.
Did you have a law enforcement experience prior to that?
Yes, I worked in South Dakota at a sheriff's office for about 6 years.
Now, could you go back to the beginning of your career from Brooklyn Center, in Brooklyn Center, and explain your role in rank and how it's changed over the years?
Sure. I started as a police officer in 2002. Spent about 3 years on patrol. I was promoted or moved into a drug task force position, and then a violent offender task force position, and then was promoted to a sergeant, and then promoted to a commander. Spent about 11 or so years as a commander. Within that role, I rotated through the 3 divisions. The division commanders report to the chief of police. I started in patrol, was moved to investigations, and then to community services, and then most recently I was back in patrol.
Your current rank is acting chief of the department, correct?
Correct.
And how long have you been in that role?
Since April 12th or 13th, somewhere in there
of this year.
of this year, yes.
And you're a licensed peace officer?
I am.
And you take continuing education courses to maintain that license, correct?
I do.
I'd like to discuss Brooklyn Center and the Brooklyn Center Police Department generally as it existed on April 11th of 2021. What's the population of Brooklyn Center?
That's around 30,000 people.
Where is it located?
It's a first-ring suburb of North Minneapolis or Minneapolis.
Okay. And that's in Hennepin County, correct?
It is.
And how many licensed peace officers, when fully staffed, does the Brooklyn Center Police Department have?
Fully staffed is 49 police officers.
And out of those, how many sergeants are there?
There is 7 sergeants.
And how many commanders are there?
3.
And then there's just one chief, right?
Correct.
In this case so far, the jury has heard about the role of a patrol officer and the role of a patrol sergeant. Could you explain your duties as a commander as of April 2021?
Sure. It's largely administrative, so report to work every day to a desk. But for the most part, take administrative duties, which could range from working on ordering patrol cars or answering emails, but largely administrative. We answer to the chief of police, and I have as a patrol commander, I'd have 6 sergeants that would report to me.
Yep. So I appreciate your modesty, but basically you supervise officers and sergeants, correct?
Correct.
And you said you have a desk job. Do you have essentially regular work hours, weekday
Correct.
hours?
Correct. Salaried employee, regular work hours, weekdays.
Okay. And what you describe as paperwork, but it's paperwork related to policing, correct?
Correct.
So I'd like to know about your duties when there's a report that an officer uses force. Can you describe the process that you follow?
So an officer will use force. A street supervisor would try to report to the scene when force is used. The officer then would fill out a use of force sheet that is reviewed by the sergeant, and then the sergeant signs off on the use of force sheet if it's appropriate force, forwards it to the divisional commander who is in charge of that sergeant. Generally, it's the patrol commander. The patrol commander reviews the use of force sheet and then submits it for filing.
Yep. And takes any necessary action, correct?
Correct.
I want to go one step farther from that. In addition to the protocols for responding to just use of force incidents, are there separate protocols for situations which would involve an officer involved shooting or in custody death?
Yes, a critical incident.
Yes.
Yeah,
And are you familiar with those policies?
I am.
Do those policies also place upon you as a supervising officer additional responsibilities?
Yes.
Now, we can talk about those responsibilities in a minute. I now just want to get a big picture. In a scene response, in terms of scene response and who conducts any subsequent investigation, are these officer-involved cases handled differently than typical cases?
Yes.
How?
So and critical incidents, right? You're talking about.
Yes.
So we would just do our agency, Brooklyn Center, if it was our incident, would just do a cursory investigation, maintain the scene, maintain the perimeter, the evidence, and turn it over to another agency.
Okay. And by turn it over, you mean turn any subsequent investigation over?
The entire, yes, the investigation.
The entire investigation?
Yes.
And why in a critical incident do you turn the investigation over to a different agency?
For conflict reasons and for transparency, so that we can allow another agency to investigate the incident.
So you don't be seen as investigating yourself?
Correct.
Or drawing conclusions about critical incidents yourself?
Correct.
As of April of 2021, is there a specific agency that typically assumed the role of investigation should there be one in Brooklyn Center?
Yes, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA.
Okay. And in a typical case, how is the decision made to essentially outsource the investigation?
The chief of police makes that decision.
If the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and I'm going to refer to it as the BCA, if the BCA is assigned to investigate a case, does the Brooklyn Center Police Department have any role, at least at the outset?
To to basically give them the information that they need to investigate the crime, a thumbnail overview of what's going on, and then handing the case over to them. So very little to answer your question more directly.
Okay. What about if an event is acute, if it just occurred? Are there other roles or other actions that Brooklyn Center Police may need to take, knowing that the BCA is ultimately going to be taking over the investigation?
Preserving the evidence on the crime scene would be the other acute one.
Yeah. And what may preserving evidence in the crime scene entail? What might it include?
Maintaining a perimeter, maintaining integrity of the evidence and the chain of custody from our agency, turning it over to another agency.
Okay. And when the investigation is turned over to another agency, does that occasionally take some time for that other agency to arrive on scene?
Yes, they are generally not a 24/7 agency.
And so if there is an event that occurs, is it common for you to take into consideration that the investigative agency may not arrive for some period of time, including hours?
Correct.
And so you know that those efforts to maintain scene integrity may also last hours.
Correct.
When the BCA arrives, would a commander typically have additional responsibilities?
Yes, just to maintain the scene and perimeter generally, because the BCA would not maintain a perimeter probably.
Sure. Would you be typically obligated to convey some information to the BCA upon their arrival?
Yes.
And what information may that be?
The layout of the crime scene, the location of the witnesses, the evidence, the location of the evidence.
And that role often falls on your shoulders, correct?
Correct.
And does that also require then, when you would come to a scene of a critical incident, that you basically have to figure out what happened or to understand what basically happened so that you can convey that information to the BCA?
Correct.
Now, in a critical incident, what is typically done with the officers involved in, let's say, the shooting, either as the shooter or a witness?
They are removed from the scene as quickly as possible, generally brought back to the police department with a partner officer.
Okay. Sometimes referred to as a buddy officer or escort officer.
Correct.
If an involved officer used a firearm in an incident, is there anything typically done with the firearm?
Eventually, I would say the BCA would collect that firearm.
But the agency that typically would be collecting that would be the BCA, not your agency.
Correct.
Prior to April 11th, have you responded to other officer-involved shootings?
Yes.
Have you done so as a supervisor?
Yes.
And have you followed Brooklyn Center's policies and protocols in those past incidents?
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to talk about April 11th. Do you recall that day?
I do.
Were you working that day around 2 p.m.?
No, I was off, but on call.
Did you receive some information that prompted a response from you?
I received a significant page from dispatch that our agency was involved in an officer-involved shooting.
And do you recall when you received that information? 2:15, sometime around there?
Correct, around that time.
Okay. And the information that you received was that there was an officer-involved shooting in Brooklyn Center, correct? That information?
Correct.
Okay. What did you do in response to that specific information?
Contacted the duty sergeant, Sergeant Johnson.
Okay. Did Sergeant Johnson convey any additional information to you?
Yes, gave me the involved officers, Officer Potter and Lucky, and I believe he also informed me that the victim was deceased.
Did he inform you that he was involved?
Eventually, I'm not sure if he initially told me.
Okay. After you received that information, what did you do?
Reported back to my residence and then went to the scene of the incident.
Okay. How long did it take you to get to the scene of the incident?
About 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay. As you drove to the scene, did you receive any additional updates?
I'm sure I did. I probably contacted the chief of police as well.
Okay. And the chief of the police at that time was Tim Gannon?
Yes.
As you were driving to the scene, what role did you anticipate playing in this case?
The scene commander in charge of the crime scene, and eventually to have to turn it over to the BCA.
Okay. You had mentioned an individual named Sergeant Johnson. Do you recall how long you've known Sergeant Johnson?
His entire career, which somewhere around 14 years, 12 to 14 years.
Okay. And is that in your capacity as supervising sergeants?
Yes.
Okay. And could you describe your relationship with him? Personal, professional?
Professional?
Professional. You had mentioned Officer Kim Potter. You'd agree she's in the courtroom today?
I do.
She's the defendant in this case?
Yes.
Can you describe the scope of your interactions with her?
Professional mostly. Was the union president, and I was the patrol commander, so we had a fair amount of interaction. We also go to the same gym, so we talk about gym and workouts.
Okay. Could you describe the type of communication you had with her in the role that she played?
As the union president,
Yes.
Labor management negotiations.
I've ruled in this case her activities as a union representative is not relevant. So move on, counsel.
Okay. Needless to say, you had interactions with her beyond those of someone who supervises officers. There was a secondary relationship that you had with her professionally.
Correct.
Are you familiar with Officer Lucky?
Yes.
And am I understanding that he is a fairly new officer in your department?
In field training, yes.
Yep. On April 11th, he was in field training, but he's still an officer in your department, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now back to the incident. Do you recall when you arrived at the scene?
Around 2:38, 2:40, somewhere in there.
As you arrived, were you wearing a body-worn camera?
No.
At that time, did you know who was in charge of the scene in terms of what sergeants were present?
I knew Sergeant Peterson and Sergeant Johnson were there. I believed probably Sergeant Peterson was in charge.
And that's Sergeant Mychal Peterson?
Yes.
Mike Peterson?
Yeah.
As you arrived, can you describe what you recall seeing at the scene?
I arrived on the eastern edge of the scene, which would be like 63rd and Catherine area. There was a crashed vehicle. There was two crashed vehicles, actually, and I believe the deceased was on the northwest corner of that intersection.
Now, I'm only going to ask you a single question, and then I'm going to play a video. Do you recall that when you first entered the scene, you encountered an officer from the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes.
And was that Officer Summers?
Yes.
Did you have a brief exchange with him?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, the state offers Exhibit 91.
Any objections to 91?
And number one, it's cumulative, and number two, it's not relevant to this offense.
The objection is overruled. I'll allow you to, 91 will be admitted and you may publish.
Thank you. Please play 91. Mr. Miller?
What's up?
We can handle some of the traffic.
Where's Mike?
And keep it right down here.
They're down, way down there by
There's going to be heavy
the lights down, way down there. That's where the initial stop was, right by the school. Or
Like 63rd and Zane, or just down a couple more?
No, just right by the, is that the church or what is
I'll
it?
just shut it down
Is Peterson down there?
I think so.
Is this a
These
witness?
are the parents.
Okay. Any witnesses?
Divert
Just the
everyone from
parents?
saying we will keep
Well,
it shut
I,
down.
no, I don't, not that I know.
Areas are interfered, but shut all traffic down.
Full for now.
Yep.
And that's you.
Following the event captured in this video, do you agree that you then walked down and talked to those sergeants, Sergeant Peterson and Johnson?
Yes.
When you arrived, would you agree that you sort of took over command of the scene?
Yes.
Did you receive information about what occurred at the scene?
I did.
From whom did you obtain that information?
Sergeant Peterson and Sergeant Johnson a little bit.
What did you learn?
The objection is sustained.
Sidebar.
Okay, I've already ruled on that objection. You may continue.
Did you discuss again, pardon me, was the information that you initially received about the involved officers reaffirmed, that Kim Potter and Anthony Lucky were involved?
Objection leading.
It reiterates
The
prior.
objection is overruled. You may answer.
Yep. Did you learn about any other involved officer at that time?
Yes.
Pardon me, Your
Go.
Chief. Beyond Kim Potter and Anthony Lucky, did you learn that there were other involved officers?
Yes, Sergeant Johnson.
Was there another involved officer?
Sergeant Johnson.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Was there a fourth?
A fourth officer?
Sure. Did you also learn information about an Officer Salvosa, who was an involved officer?
In the incident?
Not in the incident, but at the scene.
Yes.
Okay. When you learned that Sergeant Johnson's status as an involved officer, did his role change at the scene?
Yes.
And how did that change?
I needed to remove him from the scene and bring him back to the police department.
You know that there is body-worn camera video which captures exchanges between you and Sergeant Johnson and Sergeant Lorenz and Sergeant Peterson?
Yes.
Okay. Just for the purposes of identifying witnesses, I'd like to show you a photograph. The state at this time offers Exhibit 92.
Is there any objection to Exhibit 92?
Okay.
92 will be admitted and you may publish.
You're now seeing Exhibit 92 on the screen, Chief Grunig. Can you describe what you see in this image?
I see myself, Sergeant Peterson on the left, and Sergeant Johnson to the right of him.
Now, when you say Sergeant Johnson is to the right of him, immediately to the right or something else?
To my right in the scene. Mike.
Yeah. Would you agree the timestamp in this image is normal time, 2:38 and 28 seconds?
Yes.
Okay. As you spoke to your sergeants, what were some of the issues that you needed to address as the scene commander at that time?
Where the crime scene occurred, the evidence, the perimeter, the involved witnesses, where those parties were, if they needed to be removed or not.
Did you ever speak to Officer Potter or Lucky?
No.
Were they on the scene when you arrived?
No.
Do you know where they went?
I believe they went to the police department.
Now, with regard to Sergeant Johnson, you did speak to him,
Briefly, yes.
and he conveyed information to you.
Yes.
And you discussed the incident with him.
Yes.
And he knew, pardon me, strike that question. Do you know that why Sergeant Johnson did not leave the scene immediately when Officer Potter and Lucky left?
I would guess to relay information to me, but I don't know for sure what he was thinking.
But eventually Sergeant Johnson did leave the scene?
Yes.
Were you aware of any other civilians besides the deceased, Daunte Wright, who were involved in this case?
Yes.
And who were they?
Mr. Wright's girlfriend, who was a passenger in the vehicle, and then another couple that was struck by his vehicle.
Okay. And they eventually left the scene too, correct?
Correct.
After you gathered information about the scene and the status of the incident and the response and in the investigation, did you take any actions?
Contacted the BCA?
And did you make a request of them?
Yes.
And what was that request?
To report to our crime scene and investigate an officer-involved shooting.
Do you recall when you placed that call?
Not exactly, no.
If you could estimate a time, could you?
Somewhere around 2:45, 3 o'clock.
Could you walk us through that phone call?
Generally, I would have contacted Phill and relayed where we were, the brief incident about what occurred, the location of where we were, some of the witnesses that we had. I would have also relayed that Sergeant Johnson had Officer Potter's handgun, and Officer Potter was the involved officer.
Did you report to your sergeants that the BCA was coming to the scene?
Yes.
And at that point, did you direct your sergeants to do anything?
Probably just to maintain the integrity of the scene and the perimeter.
And as you were waiting for the BCA's arrival, do you recall speaking to any civilians at the scene?
I believe I spoke to Mr. Wright's mother.
And what was the purpose of your communication with them?
To express my condolences and ask that she not move into the crime scene.
If I showed you a still image of you talking to Mr. Wright's family, would you recognize it?
Yes.
This time the state offers Exhibit 94.
Jimmy, what's your objection? That's irrelevant. We've had a lot of pictures.
The objection is sustained.
Prior to today's testimony, did you see a photograph of you talking to the Wright family?
Yes.
At some point, did agents from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension arrive?
Yes.
And did you have any contact with the agents?
Yes.
Who did you speak to?
Phill, special agent.
And do you recall at what point Special Agent Phill arrived at the scene?
Not exactly the time. Probably about an hour later.
Hour later, that'd be about 3:45 then?
Yeah.
Okay. When he arrived, did you discuss with him the information that you knew?
Yes.
And was it important at that time for you to convey everything that you did know?
Yes.
What other information besides just the basic factual circumstances did you convey to Agent Phill?
The answer is based on hearsay.
Sidebar, please. Okay, counsel, you understand what my prior ruling is. You may continue.
Am I correct, Chief, that you conveyed to Mychal that Brooklyn Center Police Department would continue to provide scene security and keep track of the officers and witnesses who were involved at the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes.
And did you also convey that you would open up the Brooklyn Center Police Department so the BCA can come and conduct a fair and independent investigation?
Yes.
If I showed you a photograph of you speaking to Mychal, would you be able to identify him?
Yes.
At this time, the state offers Exhibit 95.
Any objection to Exhibit 95? I don't believe it is. The objection is overruled. 95 will be admitted into evidence and you may publish.
Sergeant Grunig, for the record, you're being shown Exhibit 95. Can you describe what you see here?
Myself and Phill.
Okay. He's the individual wearing the blue suit in this image?
He is, yes.
Okay, and where are you standing in this image?
In front of the victim's vehicle.
Okay. And would you agree the timestamp on this image is 15:52 or 3:52 p.m.?
Correct.
And was this the time frame when you were conveying to Agent Phill what you were told about this incident?
Yes.
How long did the BCA remain at the scene? How long did the BCA remain at the crime scene conducting the investigation?
Until around 7:30, 7:45 or so.
Okay. How long did you remain on the scene?
For that entire time.
And by that time, to your knowledge, the crime scene investigation had concluded?
Yes.
Okay. I now would like to talk about your role in this case since the incident. Has the Brooklyn Center Police Department cooperated with the BCA since this incident?
Yes.
Have you made officers available to speak to the BCA?
I have.
Have you made officers available to talk to the state and the defense in this case?
We have.
Have you made available training records, personnel records, body-worn camera footage, squad video, records from prior cases that may bear on issues in this case?
We have.
No further questions. Thank you, Chief.
Yes.
No questions.
Okay, you may step down.
Thank you.
All right, the state may call its next witness.
At this time, the state calls Special Agent Mychal.
Special Agent, will you please step behind the witness chair? Raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this cause? All right. Please take a seat and please remove your mask. State your full name and spell it.
Charles Mychal Phill, C-H-A-R-L-E-S, Mychal, common, Phill, P as in Paul, H-I-L-L the second.
Okay, couple rules to keep in mind when testifying. Yes or no instead of shaking your head or saying uh-huh and or because the court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately and don't answer, please, unless I tell you to. And only one person can talk at a time, so wait until the question's finished before you answer.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Counsel?
Could you state your occupation for the record?
I'm an assistant special agent in charge at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
How long have you been with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension?
14 years now, almost 15.
Are you currently in the Force Investigations Unit?
Yes, I supervise that unit
Okay.
in the state of Minnesota.
Can you describe for the jurors, just taking another step back, can you describe for the jurors what the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or the BCA, is?
Sure. We're the largest investigative arm for the state under the Department of Public Safety. In the BCA, there's 3 divisions. There's the laboratory, there's Justice Information Systems, and there is investigations, which I'm a part of. Within investigations is clearly many other sections.
I now want to discuss your background, sir. Prior to your career in law enforcement, could you describe your educational background?
Sure, I have a bachelor's in criminology from Fresno State University in California and a master's in criminal justice administration from Michigan State University.
After school, where did your professional career begin?
I was a deputy sheriff for 4 years in Seattle, Washington, King County Sheriff's Office, and I then lateraled to Minnesota to work at the Brooklyn Park Police Department, and then after that, 2007, I joined the BCA.
Brooklyn Park, where is that in relation to Brooklyn Center, Minnesota?
It is right next to it, right straight to the west.
When you transitioned to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, what roles have you had at the BCA?
I joined in 2007 with the predatory crime section, then did some narcotics, then I went to the financial crimes task force. After that, I joined the SWAT team, crime scene team, then to homicide. I was in homicide for 5 years. After that, I was promoted and supervised the predatory crime section in the metro here, and then the information and operations section, and then back to homicide, and then now the force investigation unit.
And all the time that you've spent at the BCA, 16 years, that's all been investigative?
Yes, sir.
And you're a licensed peace officer?
Yes, sir.
And you take continuing education courses to maintain that license, correct?
Yes, sir.
Am I correct that as the supervising agent of force investigations, you conduct investigations on police officer use of force cases?
Yes, we do.
And obviously that would include officer-involved shootings.
Yes.
And as a supervising agent, what duties and obligations do you have?
Well, as a supervisor of the unit, there's currently about 10 of us. There's about 100 agents in the entire BCA, but our unit's about 10. When we're notified at the request of another agency, because the BCA is an assist agency first and foremost, we're requested to take over these investigations. Once that occurs, then I start to make phone calls, notify my administration, figure out what happened, and try to figure out how many agents I need to respond.
And let me unpack that just a little bit. In regard to officer-involved shootings, does the BCA, I believe you testified, does the BCA work on those at the request of local agencies, or do you have a separate jurisdiction?
At the request. The BCA agents have statewide jurisdiction throughout the state for any crimes in Minnesota statutes. However, uses of deadly force, officer-involved shootings, we're not required by law to investigate those. Sheriffs and police chiefs can decide who they want to investigate those. They tend to call the BCA. We've done them over the years, more and more each year, and we're now kind of the preferred agency. However, it's not required that we do so. It's at the request of a chief or a sheriff.
From a scene response and investigative role, why are these cases handled differently than typical cases within particular law enforcement agencies?
We call these cases critical incidents. They're not always shootings. They're uses of deadly force usually. So they're high-profile cases. And by calling in an objective third-party organization to the investigation, it allows the chief, the sheriff to step back and let another organization investigate it, handle the case all the way to its conclusion, all the way to court if need be.
Avoid conflicts, be independent, etc.?
That is correct. So there's no appearance of bias.
Okay. When an incident of this type occurs, is it then like you get a phone call from the chief of police or a commander or something like that?
Usually law enforcement will call our operations center, which is 24 hours, or if they know us, which many do know the agents in my unit, they'll call us directly and they'll say, we just had a critical incident, we just had a shooting, and then they'll ask what to do next. We ask them certain questions, and that helps us coordinate our response.
If the BCA is assigned a particular case, does the local agency have any role in the case?
Oh, absolutely. Because these cases occur throughout the state, we're responding I have agents throughout the state, so it can take us anywhere from a half hour to 3 hours to get there. So in the meantime, the local agencies there, we rely on them to secure the scene, make sure that it's properly protected with tape, barriers, whatever need be to protect the evidence, and keep out citizens, media, anybody who might disturb the evidence. That's required. We need them to do that because we just don't have the personnel or the quickness to get there. And then we also need them to coordinate getting witnesses out of the scene and back to the police department or the sheriff's office so that we can interview them, talk to them.
Once the BCA arrives, does the local agency still have a role?
Yes, so even after we've arrived on scene, there's a lot of information that we're still gathering to figure out what happened, how many people are involved. It's always an ever-changing process. As soon as we arrive, more and more information becomes known to us. So as we are liaisoning with that agency, we're asking them certain things like, do they have body cameras? Do they have squad video? Is there evidence they collected? There's certain documents, reports, records that we're going to ask for. So throughout the process, we are asking certain things of that agency.
In the years since you've been at the BCA, how many officer-involved shooting cases have you worked on?
I have worked on, meaning assisted in some way, well over 100, and I've been the case agent for probably 24.
Can you describe what is entailed by being a case agent or lead agent?
Certainly, these cases are not typical cases where maybe one person or two agents can work them. They really take multiple agents. So the case agent is just the person who's the lead, who tries to take the lead initially to speak to the involved officers, speak to the family of the civilians involved, to kind of give them both a picture of what it is we're going to do. And then multiple agents will do all sorts of duties, interviews, evidence collection, however that may be, and it could be throughout the state for one incident. They will do their own reports. Those reports will come in, and the case agent's job is kind of watch those reports come in, see what evidence is being collected, watch the videos that can be watched, and make sure that pretty much the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed for the case file.
I'd like to talk about how a case begins in your unit. Can you describe a typical protocol for how the BCA responds to the scene and what they do at the scene in a typical officer-involved shooting?
Typically, we're called. Usually, they're at nighttime or the weekends, and I try to get as much information as I can. And as I said, it's always fluid, but I need to know how many people to respond. So I'll try to figure that out first. Once we know how many people to respond, we need to know the area, the address, obviously, indoor, outdoor, those sort of things. I also need to notify my administration, who needs to know certain information. I have to notify the crime scene team. At the BCA, our crime scene team is comprised of mainly scientists, not police officers. So they're not sworn. They're scientists who trained in collecting evidence. So I notify them so that they can respond with the appropriate personnel they need to get to the scene and do what they need to do. Once we start to figure out a little bit of what's happening, I'll usually direct certain agents to the police department or the sheriff's office because there's work to be done there, and then others will go to the scene itself because there's work to be done there.
So it's you'd agree that it's essentially information dependent. How many agents, where you need to send them, what do they need to do, etc.
Yes, sir.
I now want to turn to April 11th of 2021. Do you recall that day?
I do.
Were you working that day?
No, it was Sunday.
Did you receive some information that prompted a response from you at approximately 2:45?
Yes, I was advised by our 24-hour operations line at the BCA that the Hennepin County Dispatch wanted to connect me to Commander Tony Grunig of the Brooklyn Center Police Department in regards to an officer-involved shooting. I called Tony, got some preliminary information from him, which was, he told me that one of his officers...
Okay, just don't relate things that people have told you, okay?
Okay.
All right. You may continue.
You'd agree that Commander Grunig provided you information, correct?
Yes.
And then on the basis of that information, you decided what was an appropriate response from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, correct?
That is correct.
And did you make all required notifications on your team?
Yes, I did. Based on what I learned, I directed some agents to the Brooklyn Center Police Department and others to the area of 63rd and Catherine in Brooklyn Center for what I was told was a shooting scene.
Okay, I know this is kind of difficult, but would you please refrain from repeating things that other people have told you?
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to move on, counsel?
I will. If the objections persist, I will ask for a sidebar, Your
All right.
Honor. When did you arrive at the scene?
I believe I got the phone call about 2:45. I got there about 3:45, so about an hour.
Okay. At the time of your arrival, was there any other personnel from the BCA present?
No, I was the first one.
When you arrived, how many individuals from the BCA were present?
Just myself.
Can you describe what you saw as you arrived?
I parked close to the scene, got out of the car, and was immediately contacted by Commander Tony Grunig.
And did Commander Grunig then convey information about what he knew occurred?
Yes.
And did he then give you a walkthrough of the crime scene?
Yes, he did.
And do you remember the significant observations that you made on your initial arrival at the scene of the crime scene?
Yes.
What were those?
I walked to a Buick that was crashed and up on a curb. In front of the Buick and to the left was a deceased male who had some clothing removed and some medical apparatus were nearby. I could observe he had a gunshot wound to the chest area. There were 2 Hennepin County deputies standing nearby. I asked them if they had a tent. They said we did get a tent put up immediately so that we could cover his body. I then started to ask Tony Grunig some more questions about personnel involved at the scene, which would help me direct what to do next.
The people he identified as involved officers, did you know their location at that time?
Yes.
Okay, and that was a Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes, it was.
After you spoke to Commander Grunig, what did you do next?
I began to contact my agents, and I needed to advise them of the size of the area, what needed to be done. First and foremost was the canvassing. I also observed what appeared to be family member inside the perimeter. I went over to those people who looked like family, introduced myself, and found out that they were related to the decedent. I told them who I was. I told them what our role at the BCA was. And even though they were inside of the perimeter, they were not near evidence or the decedent. So I allowed them to stay in that position, stay there, so that we could do our job at the crime scene.
Did other members of your team arrive at that point?
Yes, they did.
And did that include forensic scientists?
Yes, the crime scene team did arrive.
What tasks did the crime scene team take up at that point?
One of the things that I do as I'm there collecting information is then as soon as the crime scene team gets there, the team leader will ask me what I've learned since the time I spoke to her on the phone to ask for her to respond, and then by the time she arrives. So obviously there's more information I gather. I relayed that to her, and at that point I did know that there was a traffic stop that started it, and that was farther down from where the crash scene was and where the body was. So I advised her of that. I did not know much more as far as evidence collection, meaning how many bullets were fired, what direction, those kind of things that a team would need to know and usually ask me. I didn't have those answers at that time, but I did tell her what I did know.
Did they, to your knowledge, follow the protocols that they have, such as photographing the scene, searching for evidence, documenting the scene, etc.?
That is correct.
Okay. And did other licensed law enforcement agents arrive as well?
Yes, I did have some more agents arrive, and they took up some duties such as interviewing the family and canvassing neighborhoods.
The crime scene team, are they led by a particular individual?
Yes.
And who was that on that day?
On that date, it was Melissa Lauren.
Melissa Lauren. And the agents that arrived, did those agents include agents such as Brent Peterson?
Yes.
And as the supervisor of this team, as those efforts were taking place to canvass and to search the area for evidence, did you oversee their actions?
Yes.
Could you describe to the jury what canvassing means?
Sure. Canvassing means that we go door to door and knock on the neighbors' doors, whether they appear home or come out and talk or not. Hopefully we can make contact. We'll ask them if they saw or heard anything, because there's eyewitnesses and there are ear witnesses, and they will usually tell us. So we identify them. If they did hear or see, then we will do a taped interview with them so we can record that statement. We also ask if anybody has outdoor cameras on their home, security cameras. If they do, we ask if we can get a copy or we'll get a search warrant for those. We also ask if they recorded the incident at all on their own personal phones or devices, and if so, we will get copies of those.
Okay. Now, you previously testified that you had covered the body of the decedent. Let's get this out of the way. Was the decedent ultimately identified?
Yes, sir.
And his name was?
Daunte Wright.
Okay. You testified that you had covered Daunte Wright's body with a tent. I don't think just those words alone would help the jury understand what you mean. At this time, pardon me, do you know that there was a photograph taken of this tent?
Yes.
At this time, the state offers Exhibit 98.
Any objection to Exhibit 98?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 98 will be admitted into evidence, and you may picture it.
Special Agent Phill, I'm showing you Exhibit 98. Could you describe what you see in this image?
Yes. I'm standing myself in front of the unmarked squad. I have a hat on.
Agent Phill, could you move that mic? I see you're moving to look at the photograph. I just want to make sure the jury hears you. Please proceed.
I'm talking to one of my agents, Colleen Myrie, and then I also have the crime scene team leader, Melissa Lauren, to my right, and then there's a crime scene team member to her right.
Okay. And is the tent that you testified about in this image?
Yes, that is the tent that the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office erected for us.
Okay, and that is the tent that covered Daunte Wright's body after you arrived at the scene?
Yes, sir.
During the time when the crime lab team was looking for evidence, did they direct their attention to a particular location? Was there something in the crime scene to which the crime lab directed their attention?
The car itself, generally, is where we were working to start.
The white Buick, which was located in the image there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And why did they direct their attention toward that?
There was a lot of blood inside the vehicle. There was a lot of blood inside the vehicle. It was clear to us that Daunte Wright had been in that vehicle. We did not know what occurred at the traffic stop. So one of the things we're looking for after we get a search warrant is a weapon, to see if there are any weapons involved. So that's what we were looking for.
And was at least some evidence of a fired gun located in the vehicle?
Yes,
And what was that evidence?
it was a fired gun cartridge.
Cartridge. Okay. And what's the significance of finding a cartridge?
Objection, irrelevant at this point.
The objections overruled. You may answer.
The significance of finding one cartridge would help to know that a bullet was fired, a gun was fired at least once. We did not know how many times, so one was significant, but we didn't know if there were more to find.
Where was the cartridge located? Do you recall?
In the driver's seat, I believe, in blood.
Now, as you were on the scene with your members of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, did another agency at the scene? Did another agency arrive at the scene to conduct additional investigation?
Yes,
And what agency was that?
the Hennepin County Medical Examiner.
Okay. And when did the Hennepin County Medical Examiner arrive?
I'm not sure at the time.
Okay. And what occurred after the Hennepin County Medical Examiner came to the scene?
I was there when they arrived, the investigator and the doctor. We do not generally touch or move decedents until they arrive, because those bodies are in custody of the medical examiner as evidence so that they can do an autopsy. So we will not roll or move or touch until they arrive. So once they arrive, then all of us went inside the tent to observe the body.
Okay. And ultimately, did the medical examiner take that body with them?
Yes, they did.
Okay. After the medical examiner took Mr. Wright's body, did the BCA continue their work in this case until at least 7:30 p.m.?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And approximately 7:37, is that when the BCA left?
That is when we cleared. I was the last BCA person to leave.
Okay. While you were at the crime scene, did you receive any updates from other agents at the Brooklyn Center Police Department that assisted you in directing your investigation?
Yes, I did.
And what information did you receive that assisted you in directing your investigation?
Objection hearsay.
It's not a hearsay purpose, Your Honor. It's
Okay.
Objection is.
All right, okay. Just make sure, Agent, not to relate anything that somebody told you, okay? All right. Could you restate your question, counsel?
Did you learn, based on communication with your other agents, that a firearm was recovered? In fact, 2 firearms were recovered?
At the Brooklyn Center Police Department.
Did you also learn that body-worn camera footage was reviewed by your agents?
Yes, sir, at the Brooklyn Center Police Department.
Did you also learn that a taser was collected from the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes, sir.
After you left the scene, what were the next steps in the BCA's investigation?
After clearing the scene, our priority was to take the evidence back to our headquarters in St. Paul, and that included the Buick vehicle so that we can do a full search there. We don't like to search vehicles generally out on scene. We like to bring them to our garage area where we can control the weather, control the lights, and collect any evidence that we find much more safely and without losing things on scene. So evidence went back to the headquarters, and then I also stayed in contact with Brooklyn Center regarding things like body camera collection and squad video collection.
Okay. And the body-worn camera and the squad video, those were ultimately reviewed?
Yes, they were.
Did you also direct agents from the BCA to conduct interviews of any individual with material information about this case?
Yes, we will interview anybody who is willing and wants to talk to us, citizens, officers, anybody.
Okay. Did you request any forensic testing of recovered evidence in this case?
Yes.
Could you describe some of the forensic testing?
Some of the testing that was done was by the firearm section of our laboratory. So they will test the firearm, they will test to see if it matches casings, bullets if they're recovered from the scene or from a person at autopsy.
Was an autopsy performed on this case, yes?
Yes.
And was evidence recovered from that autopsy and brought to the BCA?
Yes.
Now, following your actions on the physical evidence and on the video evidence, did you also collect some documentation or paperwork from the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes, we did.
And did that include training records and employment records?
Yes, we request those for most uses of deadly force.
Okay. Why do you collect training records?
We collect training records to make sure that whatever weapons or tools or devices were used were in accordance with the department policy, and if so, when were they last trained on them to use them. It's a pretty important thing that prosecutors request.
Okay. Agent Phill, you've discussed a number of actions here that were taken by other individuals, other investigators, other scientists. Are you aware that there are other BCA agents and scientists who are going to testify about their roles, their respective roles in this case over the course of this trial?
I am aware, yes.
Okay. No further questions at this time.
We have no questions.
All right. Thank you, Agent. You may step down. All right, members of the jury, we're going to adjourn for the day, and we'll start up at 9 o'clock on Monday. But I want to remind you of the instructions I gave you earlier regarding your conduct as jurors. Please keep these in mind each time we recess and when we adjourn for the day. As I explained earlier, it is essential that you follow these rules to ensure the fairness of this trial to all parties. While I will not try not to repeat the instructions to help you remember, I may not always do so. So if I forget, please remember what these instructions are. Just because I don't repeat these instructions don't mean they don't apply. Do not let outsiders influence you. This includes family members and friends and anyone else who was not actually involved in this trial. Do not discuss this case with other jury members during the trial. You'll have plenty of time to do that at the end of the trial. Once you've heard all the evidence and I've sent you to the jury room with my instructions and the verdict forms. Do not talk to anyone involved in this case, the defendant, the lawyers, or the witnesses. If anyone tries to discuss this case with you outside the courtroom, report this to me. When you go home during the trial, do not talk to your family, friends, or others about the case. You may tell them that you are a juror on a criminal case, and that is all I want you to tell them. Do not report your experiences as a juror while the trial and deliberations are going on. Do not email, blog, tweet, text, or post anything to Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, YouTube, or other social networking sites about this trial, even if I have not specifically mentioned other media sites. Do not visit any chat rooms where this case may be discussed. Do not read or listen to news reports or newspaper, magazines, radio, television, podcasts, or other media about this case. Don't do your own investigation. Don't ask people about the case. Don't visit any of the locations mentioned in the trial. Do not use internet map applications such as MapQuest or Google Earth or similar mapping media to view the locations. Do not research anything about the case, including the issues, evidence, parties, witnesses, location, or the law through any form of written, print, electronic, or internet media, including Google, Safari, Firefox, Bing, or similar search engines. Do not create your own demonstrations or reenactments of the events which are the subject of the case. Keep an open mind until you've heard and seen all the evidence. Remember that you cannot consider anything you hear or learn about this case outside this courtroom. If you don't follow these instructions, you may jeopardize the trial. This may require the whole trial to be redone, and we will have to start over. You may also be penalized for your misconduct. If you become aware that another juror may have violated any of these rules, you must report it to me. I know that it can be a difficult thing to do, but in order to preserve the fairness to all parties that is guaranteed in our system of justice, it is very important that you do so. All right, I think it might be a little slippery out there. Travel home safely and have a relaxing weekend, hopefully. And I will see you on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Please be seated. Counsel, what I'd like to do is just have an in-chambers conference with you about the autopsy photographs, okay? And how we're going to deal with them with respect to live streaming. I'm going to invite our technician in to let you know what you should do if a photograph is going to be shown. As you know, the overflow courtroom, the autopsy photos will be depicted, but the autopsy photos in respect to the wishes of the family and the dignity of the deceased will not be live streamed. So, if you could follow me back to chambers, and Emmanuel, when you're ready, would you join us, please?